Hello. Welcome back to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin, and as you know, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, a month dedicated to raising awareness about a reality that many of us prefer not to see, human trafficking. That's why this January, I created a special series called Unmasking Human Trafficking in Our Community, desenmascarando el tráfico humano en nuestra comunidad, where every Friday I'll be sharing a new episode exploring this urgent, close to home, and often silenced issue. Because if there's one thing I've learned is this: silence remains one of the biggest allies of human trafficking. As long as it's not spoken about, as long as it's not named, and as long as we keep thinking that doesn't happen here, exploitation continues to grow in the shadows. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, Close to Home, Human Trafficking Exists Here, Cerca de Casa, El Tráfico Humano Existe Aquí, I invite you to listen. It's an important foundation for understanding why this problem is not distant, is not foreign, and is not something that only happens in other countries or other communities. And today, we will continue with the second episode of this series, starting with an uncomfortable truth. What you thought you knew about human trafficking is probably wrong. You might think human trafficking only happens to foreigners. You might imagine chains, dark rooms, visible beatings. You might believe that if it were real, you would notice it immediately. But today I'm here to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable, but it's necessary to hear. Human trafficking doesn't always look the way you imagine. It often hides in relationships that seem like love, in jobs that promise stability, in opportunities that sound too good to be true, in private messages, in subtle manipulation, in silences imposed by fear. This episode is not meant to scare you. It's meant to open your eyes, to question what you've been taught, to break myths to protect traffickers and leave victims alone. Because the more we understand the truth, the less power the lies have. So welcome. This is episode 2 of our series, Myths and Lies, What You Didn't Know About Human Trafficking. Mitos y mentiras, lo que no sabías sobre el tráfico humano. So you already know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or your cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. So let's talk about different myths. Number 1, human trafficking only affects foreigners. This is one of the most dangerous myths and also one of the most harmful, because when we believe that human trafficking has only one face, one language, one immigration status, we leave out 1,000 of people who are being exploited right now. Human trafficking does not discriminate based on immigration status. It doesn't ask where you were born. It doesn't check if you have papers. It doesn't care about your nationality. It affects people born here, permanent residents, people with visas, people without documentation. It happens to those who work hard, to those who trust, to those seeking an opportunity to get ahead. Because what human traffickers really look for is an area where that person might be vulnerable. Whether it's economic, when someone doesn't have enough resource to cover basic needs, emotional, when someone feels alone, invisible, or unheard, fear, urgent need, painful loneliness. Many victims never crossed the border. They didn't travel far. They didn't have to leave their country. Exploitation crossed into their life. It entered their home, their workplace, their relationship, their daily routine. And this is where the myth becomes even more dangerous. Because when we think that could never happen to me, or that doesn't happen to people like me, that only happens somewhere else, we lower our guard. We stop asking questions. We stop seeing the signs, and we stop listening. And meanwhile, the silence grows. So now let's go with myth number 2. Human trafficking is only sexual. Let's be clear. Yes, sex trafficking exists, and it's real, and it's devastating. But believing that is the only form of human trafficking is one of the biggest mistakes we make. Because human trafficking doesn't always involve sex. Often it's disguised as work, as an opportunity, as I'm gonna help you. So let's briefly talk about sex trafficking. Sex trafficking happens when a person is forced, manipulated, or controlled to perform sexual acts in exchange for money or benefits they don't control. And here's where many get confused. There aren't always beatings. There aren't always chains. There isn't always someone locked in a dark room. Sometimes there's someone saying, I love you. Trust me, this is all for us. Sometimes there's emotional dependency, fear of being alone, fear of losing children, fear that no one will believe them. Or silent threats that leave no bruises but leave deep lasting marks. On the other side, you have labor trafficking. That is also another form of human trafficking, which tends to be more invisible. It's people working long hours, full days, weeks without rest, without fair pay, or without pay at all, without days off, without the right to call in sick, without the right to say no. under constant threats. Threats of being fired, threats of calling immigration authorities, threats of losing the little they have. And it happens in homes where someone cares for others while no one cares for them, in restaurants where exhaustion is normalized, in fields where the sun burns and silence weighs heavy, in factories, the businesses you see every day, places you walk into without imagining what's happening behind the scenes. And here's something important. If someone controls your money, keeps your wages, withholds your documents, decides when you can leave, who you can talk to, or if you can go to the doctor, that is not work. That is exploitation. And the hardest part, many people don't even know they're being trafficked. They think, that's just life. That's just work. That's what I have to endure. And no, it's not. Not knowing doesn't make someone less of a victim. It makes them more vulnerable. And that's why we need to talk about this, because the more we understand the truth, the less power exploitation has. Myth number 3. Only women are victims of human trafficking. This is another common and dangerous myth, and one that erases many victims. When we hear human trafficking, many automatically think of young women exploited sexually. And that's not wrong, but it's not the whole story. Human trafficking affects men, women, non-binary, teenagers, adults, all genders, all ages, and all nationalities. Men are also victims, and society often doesn't want to see it, because the idea of a man being exploited sexually or for labor doesn't fit what we think should happen, and that makes men suffer in silence. So let's talk about male and labor trafficking. Many men are caught in labor trafficking. They work impossible shifts, under threats, without fair pay. They are exploited in agriculture fields, construction, offices, factories, workshops. They have no freedom to come and go or decide about their own money. Their documents can be withheld, and any attempt to protest is punished or threatened. Sometimes they are forced to work in places that seem legal but are completely controlled, isolated, and vulnerable. Much of labor exploitation goes unnoticed because there are no visible beatings, no chains, no scandal. Think about it. How often do we even stop to consider about the people cooking our food in restaurants or working behind the scenes? Almost never, right? So now let's talk about men and sex trafficking. Yes, men are also victims of sexual exploitation, and it's even more invisible because there's shame and social stigma that keeps a lot of them from speaking out. Some are deceived with false promises of jobs or travel. Others are emotionally manipulated or threatened so they cannot escape or report. And this is why this myth is so dangerous. Because when we believe that only women are victims, we ignore that men are trapped in labor or sexual exploitation. Teenagers of all genders, trans and non-binary people who face even greater risk. This means many suffer in silence, thinking no help is available and no one will believe them. So what we need to remember is that human trafficking has no single face. No gender can stop it, and no age makes it impossible. Control, manipulation, violence, and exploitation can touch anyone. And the more we understand that, the more people can receive help. Recognizing that men are also victims does not diminish the experiences of women. On the other side, it broadens the truth. It shows the magnitude of the problem, and it forces us to really come together and to really help everyone. So the next time you hear about human trafficking, remember, it's not just a female, it's not just sexual, and it's not just distant. It's real, it's close, and it affects all genders. So now I want to briefly talk about grooming and manipulation, when danger doesn't look like danger. Grooming doesn't start with violence, and that's what makes it so dangerous, because it doesn't start with yelling, it doesn't start with hitting, it doesn't start with clear threats. Sometimes it starts with attention, with someone who listens when no one else does, someone who responds to messages quickly, someone who seems to understand you, who validates you, who makes you feel seen, important, and needed. And it starts with promises of love, of support, of stability, of a better future. And little by little, the phrases repeat. Only I understand you. Your family doesn't appreciate you. They don't want the best for you. Trust me. Don't tell anyone. It's better this way. And before you realize it, something changes. Slowly, they isolate you. They separate you from people who truly know you. They control who you talk to, what you say, even what you share. They confuse care with control, love with possession, support with manipulation. And when the person begins to feel something is wrong, when they want to set boundaries, when they want to leave, fear is already there. Fear of losing everything, fear of threats, fear of not being believed, perhaps even fear of being alone. So it's important to say this. Grooming doesn't only happen to young people. It doesn't only happen to teenagers. It happens to adults, to people seeking love, to those needing work, to those longing for belonging, stability, and safety. Human trafficking doesn't arrive announcing itself. It comes disguised as an opportunity, as help, as someone who wants the best for you. And that's why it's so important to truly understand what human trafficking is. And today, many recruitments don't happen in dark streets or hidden places. Nowadays, sometimes it begins in front of a screen on social media like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp, Snapchat, anywhere where someone can appear and make another person trust them in a matter of seconds. And here's the most dangerous part. It's not always a stranger. It's not always someone who raises immediate suspicion. Sometimes it's someone who seems trustworthy, someone who shares your interests, someone who talks like you, someone who understands your fears, someone who claims to know your dreams. They might offer work, they might offer help, they might offer love, they might offer an opportunity that will change your life. And the more we trust, the easier it is for the abuser to take control. Because social media allows things that would be impossible in real life, creating fake identities with photos and profiles that look real, gaining trust quickly, whether in minutes or days, accessing vulnerable people directly without anyone else noticing, controlling the information you share and manipulating what you think is true. And it's not about being afraid of technology. It's not about turning off your phone or leaving the internet. It's about awareness, caution, and critical thinking. If something sounds too good to be true, breathe, verify, talk to someone you trust, ask questions, do the research, don't ignore the signs. And remember, technology is not the problem. The problem is when someone uses it to exploit, control, and manipulate. Because the screen can be a gateway into human trafficking. And often the victim doesn't even realize it's there. And the more we understand how this modern danger works, the more capable we are of protecting ourselves, protecting others, and making sure silence isn't a complicit. And as I have mentioned before, not all victims will identify as a victim of human trafficking. And not all victims ask for help, because not all realize that what they're experiencing is human trafficking. And that's one of the reasons why this violence continues in silence. Because many victims don't recognize their situation as such. Because traffickers have made it seem normal, or just part of the job, or because of fear so big it makes them not know what to do. But there are areas to look out for where something may be wrong, and recognizing them can make a huge difference. According to the organization like the U.S. Department of Transportation, these signals can indicate someone may be controlled or exploited, not just sexually but also labor-wise. Lack of control over money or personal documents. The victim doesn't have access to their ID, money, or phone. All are in someone else's hands. Excessive control by another person. The person is always accompanied, cannot speak for themselves, or someone else answers for them. Restricted movement or isolation. They cannot go out freely, socialize, or move without permission, something they may not even notice as abnormal. Inconsistent stories or rehearsed responses. The person may repeat a story that doesn't fit, as if someone told them exactly what to say. Extreme dependence on another person. They may not have access to key information or need approval for every decision. Inhumane living or working conditions. Working without breaks, living where they work, without fair pay or rest. Situations many normalize without realizing they are rights violations. And it is important to clarify, these are just some signals that could indicate someone is a victim of human trafficking. They are not a checklist, and a person doesn't have to show all or even any of them to be in danger. They simply help us observe and stay aware. So if you made it this far, I want us to take a moment and breathe together. Talking about human trafficking is uncomfortable. I know, it's a topic that hurts, that scares, and that we often prefer to ignore. But silence is even more painful for those who live it every day. For those who feel fear, loneliness, and shame. For those who have lost control over their life, their work, their family, and their freedom. So remember this, not all victims look like we imagine. Not all trafficking is sexual. Not all abuse leaves visible marks, and many times the people closest to you could be suffering in silence. That's why listening, learning, and speaking out is an act of power and love. And information doesn't just educate, it can help someone, because recognizing the signs, asking questions, believing someone can be the difference between remaining trapped or reclaiming your freedom. So share this episode, talk about it with your family, friends, and community. Ask questions, don't take anything for granted, and never forget, abuse is not love. Control is not protection. Silence does not protect. If you can, be the voice that breaks the silence. Be the person who believes. Be the support someone needs to start healing. Here we don't stay silent. Here we speak, we listen, and we act. Because the more we open our eyes, the more lives we can touch, and the more silences we can break. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the full list of books mentioned in No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the first episode through today. You'll also find the link to the U.S. Department of Transportation resource I shared today, where you can learn more about human trafficking. And remember, the Department of Homeland Security Blue Campaign also offers many free brochures and materials about human trafficking. And don't forget, every Friday there's a new episode waiting for you. The next episode in our series is called Silent Voices, Surviving Labor Trafficking, Voces Silenciadas, Sobrevivir el Tráfico Laboral. They worked hard, they endured endless hours, they trusted promises of stability and opportunity, but behind that job there was control, fear, and abuse. In this episode, we give a voice to those who were exploited, who were forced to remain silent. Real stories of survivors who endured relentless workdays, stolen wages, withheld documents, and constant threats, and yet found the strength to leave and rebuild their lives. Because labor trafficking doesn't always look like change. Sometimes it looks too much like what society calls normal. In this episode, we'll go deeper into how labor trafficking works, why it's so hard to see, and how even people who seem to have a normal job may be exploited. We'll talk about the signs, the methods of control, and how manipulation and fear hide behind everyday routines. This episode will make you question what you think you know about work, dignity, and freedom. And hearing these stories will change the way you see the struggle for life and justice. Abuse is not work, control is not normal, and silence does not protect. So don't miss it, and please help me share these episodes to raise awareness about this terrible crime called human trafficking. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.